Jessica Care Moore is in the tradition of myself and Dudley Randall. Dudley Randall started and was a publisher and editor of Broadside Press that started back in 1962 or so in Detroit, Michigan. And I modeled Third World Press after Broadside Press. And, and he was in Detroit. And I grew up in Detroit, but ended up here in Chicago. And there is another publisher in Detroit, Naomi Long Magic, who started Lotus Press. So now it's Broadside Lotus. So Jessica Care Moore has more black press. Okay, so she started a publishing company also. And our goal is to always move toward independence, to try to do that which will allow us to be decision makers rather than people making choices within the parameters of other people's decisions. That's why I started Third World Press back in 1967. Artists have a lot more leeway than the average person. Okay, the average person, for the most part, he or she is making choices within the parameters of other people's decisions. Even here at Kennedy King, or I used to teach at Chicago State, or DePaul, or Cornell, or University of Iowa, wherever I was. But I understood the limitations in the academy. But once I got the academy back into our community, the question was, what do we own? Okay? And one of the real problems with our people, with most people, not just our people, they don't even own themselves. And that the road toward owning oneself is knowing about oneself, one's history, one's culture, one's bonding traditions, that which allows us to be whole people, okay? And one of the real problems we have with our community and most disenfranchised communities is that we're not whole people, and that we came out of enslavement basically not whole people. And what we had to do, or what we do in order to become a whole people, is the acquisition of knowledge, okay? And that's why I started Third World Press, and why she started More Black Press, and why Dudley Randall started Broadside Press, why Margaret Burroughs and Charlie Burroughs started the DuSable Museum, and so forth. I came out of the military in 1963. I spent 3 years in the United States Army. And just like many young men who was learning new knowledge and involved in struggle, by the time I came out of the military in 1963, I read close to, maybe 900 books. I was reading close to a book a day, and I would write an essay on each book I read. But coming out of the military in 1963, I was still poor. I didn't have any serious money. And I could not go, even though I was on the GI Bill, it was very difficult to get into a 4-year university. And so I came to Wilson. And the reason I ended up at Wilson, back in 1960, I was selling magazine subscriptions with a group of men and women traveling across Illinois into St. Louis. And my lie was I was working my way through Howard University. I'd never been to D.C., never been to Howard, but I read Sterling A. Brown, I read Raphael Logan, I read these scholars and writers and poets who taught at Howard. So I used that as my lie to sell these subscriptions. And at that time, I only had one suit, a couple of change of clothes, and driving across Illinois with this group. And we stopped in Springfield. And I knocked on the door, and this very astute, deliberate black man answered the door. And I went into my spiel. So I'm trying to work my way through Howard University, I'm trying to sell these subscriptions. And a big smile came across his face. He said, well, come on in. I'm a Howard University Law School graduate, all right? And he was in the administration somehow in Springfield, Illinois, state of Illinois. And so I walked in less than 4 or 5 minutes, he knew I was not at Howard. But he did not berate me. He did not in any way insult me and put me out. He asked me, was I hungry? I'm 6'1", 131 pounds, like a walking skeleton, so he knew I was hungry. And so he asked his wife to fix me a sandwich and give me something to drink. And we sat down, and he immediately bought subscriptions to Jet, Ebony, and life. And then he started telling me about education. He said, what no one could ever take from you is a good education. I said, I agree, because I'm a reader. And back at the motel, I got a suitcase full of books and suitcase with my clothes in. And he said, well, why are you not in school? I said, I'm poor. I don't have any money, okay? And he said, well, what's coming online now across the country are community colleges. And that you should consider going to community colleges because they're for men and women, young people who do not have the resources. And that's how I got into my mind. But what happened that morning or early afternoon, I got up to leave, and he said, son, I'm still walking toward the boy. He said, son. And then he said, young man. No one ever called me son before. All right, so I didn't respond. And as I'm going to the door and coming back now, at least turning around, he went into his wallet and pulled out a $20 bill. This is 1960. And he folded a $20 bill into quarters and said, put this in your wallet and keep it for an emergency. Now, tears are kind of coming into my eyes now because no black man most certainly ever been that kind to me. And I thanked him profusely, left. And of course, the people I was traveling with, we went to East St. Louis, and what happened, I got very ill, and it left me in the hotel. And so I used the $20 to pay my bill. Went to a pawn shop. Poor man's bank is a pawn shop. Went to the pawn shop in St. Louis, pawned everything I had. And I was going to try to join the reserves, but ended up joining the regular army. They weren't taking reserves. And so that's all I could do at that time. And the Army at that time, as is today, was a poor boys or poor girls' answer to unemployment. And I didn't have family, and I just had ended up in the military. Now, what's interesting about that and why Wilson plays an important part of that, my mother had asked me to go to the Detroit Public Library back in, when I was 14, 15 years old, check out Richard Wright's Black Boy. And I did. And I read through Black Boy. But I also went through Richard Wright's White Man Listen. And in White Man Listen, there's an essay by Richard Wright on black literature. And in that essay on black literature, he referenced Gwendolyn Brooks, okay? And that's the first time I ever heard of her as a young boy, a teenager. And then as I'm going to basic training, I'm reading Paul Robeson's Here I Stand. And got to basic training, about 300 white men or more, and 3 black men, and they separate us, okay? And I step off the bus, and I have Paul Robeson's book in my hand, and the white drill sergeant, he sees Paul Robeson's big, black, magnificent face, and he snatched the book out of my hand and said, what's your Negro mind doing reading that black communist, all right? That's the first time I heard double negative used so creatively, okay? So he said, all you women up against the bus. Now, there are no women there. This is 1960, okay? And he held my book over his head, and he commenced to tear the pages out the book and gave a page to each of the recruits and said, use this for toilet paper. Now, at this point, my options are few. I can't go AWOL because I end up in jail. I don't have a family to go to anyway. So as I stood that morning in 1960, in October, my options were very, very few, but I decided 3 things. One, that I'm a man of African ancestry, I'm a black man in America, and I will never apologize for that again. Number 2, that ideas and the creators of ideas and the carriers of ideas run the world. And everybody tap dances somebody's ideas. If you're Christian, that's an idea. If you're Muslim, that's an idea. If you're Jewish, if you're Buddhist, if you're Sikh, those are ideas. If you're Democrat, Republican, if you're communist or socialist, ideas. In fact, if you remember the Sugar Hill Gang, that's a damn idea. And so I decided to go into the idea business, all right? And so that started my reading because we were between wars. I was in the military between 1960 and 63, no war, all right? So and the motto in the military at that time was hurry up and wait. And I waited with books and literature and with my pen, and I wrote. Every book I read, I wrote a 250-word essay, which may not have been that very legible at that time, but as I continued to write over those 3 years, it became legible. And so when I came out of the military, what the lawyer in Springfield told me about community colleges, that's why Wilson. Now, the interesting thing about going to Wilson, I found out later on that Gwendolyn Brooks had graduated from Wilson. And so I went to Wilson. I worked nights and went to Wilson. And, I finished 2 years, about a year and a half. Most of the instructors at Wilson at that time were white. I will say maybe 1/3 of the students were white, and maybe another 20% maybe were Hispanic, Spanish speaking, and then the rest black. And but it was a good experience. I mean, it's not negative at all, but I was prepared already. And when I left Wilson after graduation, I went over to Roosevelt University. I've spoken at several of the classes here with professors that I know, and I gave one reading here since I left, and that's it. So this kind of reconnection is very important tonight. Jessica Care Moore is the perfect venue for a person for us to bring us back to this venue, and what we plan to do tonight, we're going to donate to Kennedy King Library a full collection of Third World Press books. This is about, maybe 200 or 300, a couple of hundred books, and for the library, because just trying to make the reconnection and our appreciation to the president, the faculty, staff, for allowing us to use this fabulous space this evening. If you don't know who you are, anybody can name you. And so it's central for any people of any culture to understand their own culture first and foremost. If you are grounded in your own culture, then you don't have to stand behind anybody. You stand equal to other cultures also, number one. Number two, what is critical for all people, I think that, and most certainly for people of African ancestry, is that we have to understand that we have to become decision makers. And there's a profound difference between a decision maker and a person who makes choices within the parameters of other people's decisions. And what has happened in this country, the decision makers are the people who are building the Loop, building Manhattan, building universities and colleges and so forth, or building businesses. Or even the 0.01% billionaires that pretty much run everything in the country, whether it's the Koch brothers or the Walden family, whatever the case may be. They're decision makers. So I think the quest for us, how do we become decision makers within the context of our own lives, and how do we get to the point where we can actually direct our own lives other than just making choices within the parameters of other people's decisions? Artists, for the most part, do that. That it doesn't matter what area of art you're in, artists make decisions about what kind of art they're going to make. But getting beyond artists, then what about engineers? What about doctors? What about lawyers? What about teachers and so forth? And that requires collaboration with other people, okay? And that's what I would suggest, and that you come through Kennedy King 4.0, I don't know what the metric is now, is a 5.0, what the case may be. You come out of here and you go on to a 4-year. And generally, if you come out the top of your class, 4.0, 5.0, what the case may be, you can get a free ride to a 4-year institution. An undergraduate degree is absolutely necessary today, all right? But a graduate degree will put you in a better position, whatever your area of competency is. But better yet, you need a PhD, MD, LLD, whatever the case may be, all right? And I taught in the academy for 42 years. I started teaching at the university level when I was 25 years old, and I just retired in 2011. And I was able to, along with other people, build Third World Press primarily because I didn't punch a damn clock, okay? When you're in education, any area of education, whether you're in the School of Arts and Sciences, tech, or whatever the case may be, you still control much of your own time, okay? And as a get up and get goer, I mean, as a person who essentially not going to stand back and let people walk over you or let people less intelligent than you give you orders, I'm not going to allow that to happen to myself. And I told my sons, and this is critical, marry a woman smarter than you. All right, that's what I did. And we've been married for over 47 years, all right? And the key point there, my wife is a professor at Northwestern, and she's a scholar. She is an endowed chair, all right? I finished teaching at DePaul. I was IB Wells Barnett University professor, all right? So the point I made, I'm a poet, I'm very emotional, but the same, and my wife is a scholar, and she's technical and strategic, okay? So she may win, I win the beginning arguments, but she end up winning the long arguments, right? And so, but education allows one to make learned, serious choices within the parameters of what they got to work with, okay? It allows you to move toward becoming a decision maker. That's what education does. Well, this 50 years mean a great deal to me. We talked about Gwendolyn Brooks. The people who mentored me are El Hajj Malik El-Shabazz, Malcolm X, Margaret and Charlie Burroughs, who were co-founders of the DuSable Museum, Dudley Randall, the poet and founder and editor of Broadside Press of Detroit, Michigan, Hort W. Fuller, who was the managing editor of Negro Digest Black World magazine, one of the most important periodicals to come out of a Black Arts movement, Barbara Ann Sizemore, Dr. Sizemore, one of the premier educators in this country, the first black superintendent of schools of the DC school system, and of course Gwendolyn Brooks, my cultural mother who mentored me for over 33 years. That without them I wouldn't be here today. So the 50-year anniversary, out of all those persons, we published all of them except Margaret and Charlie Burroughs. We published Malcolm, we published Dudley Randall, we published Hort Fuller, we published Gwendolyn Brooks. We have 15 books that we published by Gwendolyn Brooks, okay? And so what is critical and what is key, and we published Barbara Ann Sizemore, her last book, is that young people realize that you're not going to change the world, even change yourself with a 140-word tweet. It's not going to work, okay? That you've got to go deep into the literature. You got to go deep into yourself. And that any people who are in control of their own cultural imperatives are financial imperatives, educational imperatives about the healthy replication of themselves. So over 50 years, Third World Press Foundation has been about publishing this literature. We've had 7 days. Tallahassee Coates and Paul Coates and Nikki Mitchell and Black Earth, we opened up last Saturday. Cornel West came in on Sunday with Father Michael Flager at his church, St. Sabina. We were off Monday, and then Tuesday, we had this powerful, very powerful movie, Footsteps to Pan-Africanism, by Paul, you're going to have to edit this, Sharika Anna that was her film. And so last night we did Gwendolyn Brooks, and tonight we're with Jessica Care Moore. Then tomorrow from 2 o'clock to 10, the Black Arts Movement at our school. We have 3 schools, and it will be at our flagship school, the Betty Shabazz Academy at 73rd and Ellis. And then with people from the Black Arts Movement featuring Sonia Sanchez, the great poet. And then Saturday, we close out with Dr. Maulana Karinga at 12 o'clock at Betty Shabazz. And then that evening, we have our gala with Cassandra Wilson. So that's it. That's 50 years. And it's been a wonderful but very stressful in many ways week, you see. So to kind of have an evening here at the college I'm alumnus of is, I think, apropos, and I'm very grateful.